Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. This is Taliesin McKnight. I am here together with my co-hosts, Robert Powell and Frater Superabo. This is Magick Occult Radio, and today we are joined by a very special guest, Aaron Leitch. Aaron Leitch is a very accomplished author. The books he has written include The Essential Enochian Grimoire, Secrets of the Magical Grimoires, Angelical Languages, The Complete History and Mythos of the Tongue of Angels. And so there are lots of books out there. So I'm really excited about this interview and lots of great stuff that we should look forward to this evening. So how are you doing today? How's the weather up there in Florida?
It is very rainy.
Very rainy.
Very rainy, yes. It kind of opened up on us today. There's been all sorts of weird weather patterns going on down here. So.
Yeah, we got some rain here too. I'm also in Florida at the other end by the ocean, and they said that there was a big rain cloud from Ohio all the way to Florida. It's crazy.
It was 80 degrees yesterday. I'm in Maryland. It was 80 degrees yesterday, and now it is about 35 and freezing rain. So it's wonderful.
Yeah, here in Texas, it's been like really weird, and like out of nowhere it got really cold. It's been raining here in Texas too. So yeah, it's like I thought it was springtime, but you never know. So just to have some type of structure or direction to today's podcast, we were thinking we could. I was thinking we can go into classical magic, and just to start off, I'm kind of curious, Aaron, like what got you started into the more classical magic, like grimoires and things like that?
Oh wow, I think that goes back to when I was out west, living in Denver, Colorado. That's where I first ran into. I ran into my first groups of Ethiopians and shamans and such. It was a pretty active community out there, and I was just being actually. I think it was one of them that actually gave me my first copy of Don Craig's Modern Magic. I was really into. I was wanting to learn more about the Qabalah at the time, and so they recognized that as what I was looking for. So that's kind of where everything started for me, not just the classical magic, but it all kind of really kicked into gear right there. I guess that was about 93. And that's where I first heard about the grimoires. I mean, outside of fiction, of course, but even there, they were kind of almost fictional, or almost legendary, is what I should say, because you couldn't find anyone who knew anything about them or owned them. All you really heard were, dark and scary legends about them being, the kind of magic that the Old Testament prophets were using, of course, which didn't turn out to be true, but that's how they were described. And that, this is how you called down the archangels or called up the demons, depending on if you were using the white book or the black book. And, it was all very dark and mysterious. And you were, it was supposed to make you afraid, and it's the kind of thing you didn't want to mess around with. And of course, that was exactly what piqued my interest, and I realized I needed to learn about those books. So that's where, from there on, it was just a matter of searching for those books. I found out that what they were calling the white book was, of course, the Key of Solomon, and what they were calling the black book was the Lemegeton of the Goetia. And as I said, none of them really turned out to be as dark and scary as the legends, or as the local legends and urban legends indicated. But that's definitely where my search began. And of course, as I was discovering the text and learning more about them, as I recall, Don Craig even goes over a few of them in the later lessons of his book. So that's where it began for me, and I began to collect the texts that I could find, began trying to put them into practice. And it wasn't very long after that, honestly. I mean, maybe within months. I think I was back in Florida by 94, and at that point I was on my own. I was disconnected from that community, and it was around that time that I met Oshani Lele, also known as Stuart Myers, and he is or at the time he wasn't, he was just beginning, but today he's a Santo. And as he was delving into Santeria and Palomayombe and the various ATRs, or the African traditional religion, and he was learning more about them, I was learning from him in turn. And he went away for, it might have been 2 or 3 years, as I recall. And he actually went away to be initiated and rise up through his house and get sainted, get crowned with his patron Orisha. So he came back a fully initiated Santo, and that was right around the time that I was gearing up to attempt the Abramelin operation. So I found myself going to him for hours at a time. I would take the grimoires to him, and we would sit there. I would sit there and go over them, and I would explain to him, well, I found this in this old ancient, text here, like Abramelin or the Key of Solomon or something like that. And I'd say, this doesn't make any sense. Why do they need to do this? Why do they need the eyes of a frog or the brain of an eagle? Or, why do they say you have to do this to a spirit? If the spirits are all just parts of your mind, then why do you have to approach the spirits in this specific way and not do this and do this? And I don't understand all this. It seems ridiculous. But then he would respond, well, no, we do the same thing in the African religions too. And here's why we do it. So little by little, I was able to start making sense of what I now call the old magic and the instructions and protocols, especially in the book of Abramelin. If it hadn't been for him and his knowledge of crowning ceremonies, I don't think I would have ever been able to perform the Abramelin operation. And by this point, we're at 97. So it was during 97 that I performed the operation, and basically everything else from there is history. So that's where it all really began and launched in earnest for me.
Wow, that's quite an amazing journey. There's something you mentioned there. You said, if all of these spirits are just different aspects of my mind, and that kind of touches on, there's this psychological model of magic, and then there's like more of the spirit model. So would you say that the grimoires, would you say that they do not operate under the psychological model, or would you say that there's some misunderstandings with that, or what is your view on that with the grimoires?
They absolutely do not work on the psychological model. In fact, that was where I was hitting the biggest roadblock. And when I would take these books to Oshani, and I'd say, why do I have to do this? It doesn't make sense if this is all in the mind. And the first thing he had to teach me, or I guess unteach me, he had to tell me that this is not all in your mind. Here in the ATRs, in my tradition, I would say, we don't see these spirits as parts of the mind. We don't see them as coming from ourselves. They're objective, they're real. And because they're real, that's why you have to do X, Y, and Z. And once he kind of drilled that into my head, that regardless of what I believed at the time, and at the time I was very entrenched in the psychological model, but regardless of how I viewed it, the authors of those grimoires, the man who wrote the Book of Abramelin, the people who wrote the Keys of Solomon, they were not viewing it psychologically. There's nothing in those books that they wrote down from the psychological perspective. They were serious, And so I had to break that. I had to understand that in order to make sense of what I was reading. And once I did, it all started to make perfect sense.
Well, it looks like a lot of people try to work with the grimoires or with these spirits that, this is just like a guided imagination, or it's kind of like an inner path working, or like it's all just a psychological type of thing. And would you say that that's more of kind of a postmodern world? Would you say that that's part of the difference between the classical magical worldview and more of our postmodern view?
Yeah, we generally put the cutoff between those two views in the 1800s, right around the founding of the Golden Dawn. That was, you're looking at right there, you're looking at a world that's it's African enlightenment. People are beginning to get a very scientific, materialistic viewpoint of things, and psychology itself was very new at the time. You might recall that the Golden Dawn has a clause in their oath that you're never supposed to allow anyone to hypnotize you. I mean, Hypnotism was so new at that time, they still believed that a man could hypnotize you and get you to do anything. You would be totally under their thrall, like in a sci-fi story or something. So, yeah, it was all new and exciting to them, and they really thought that they had figured it all out, that all the old texts and everything had really just been psychology texts. It had really all just been archetypal and aspects of the mind. And so the Golden Dawn developed their system that way. And then now I don't, obviously I'm a member of the Golden Dawn, I don't have a problem with them having the psychological model, because with the Golden Dawn and anyone who followed them, you look at Thelema, you look at Denning and Phillips and their work, and all these other groups that came after that were heavily influenced by them, they're all theurgic systems. They're all systems designed to change you inside. And, like in the Golden Dawn, there's no magic in the Golden Dawn. You don't even get to magic unless you pass the outer order tests and initiations and then go into their inner order. So it's fine that their system is psychological because that's their focus. They're focused on the individual and changing the person and making them an adept, an initiate, who can then go on to practice the real magic. But anything before that, anything before the Golden Dawn and before that particular era in history, you're not going to see psychology in this. So now I'm not saying there's no psychology. I mean, the human mind and how it interfaces with the universe is very important. You have to know yourself, you have to know your mind, you have to know how it works, how communication with spirits takes place. This is all aspects of the human mind. But none of those old texts saw the entities as just projections of ourselves. The spirits were real, the angels are real. And when you use the magic and you follow those protocols that they give, you get results that make it very hard to see this material as purely psychological. I can tell you that.
Well,
Aaron?
Go ahead.
Okay, Aaron, just real Frater Superabo here. Pleasure to meet you. Just want to kind of piggyback on that really quick. As someone, you mentioned Don Craig's book, Modern Magic, as someone that worked through that book, and I found it very helpful as a beginner magician. I think it kind of did exactly what he intended it to do, as you to be able to pick up any book of magic and be able to understand terms and things like that. And he did go into the goetic style magic, but it was very psychological. But I remember kind of along the lines of something you were saying. It just didn't. When I was attempting to do it, feeling that way, like it's in my mind, it didn't feel right. It didn't necessarily feel right to me. And I always had this leaning that, like, one, it's just so much cooler if it's something outside of yourself, and two, that it's just there's just more. I just got more out of it, and then results started to come, very much like yourself. And we, as Taliesin asked about eras, and the postmodern era and things of that nature. Do you see a resurgence of this spirit model coming around now? Like to me, it just seems like more and more we're circling back around to that the spirit model, seeing these as actual separate entities. Can you comment on that? Do you see that happening as well, and what's your take on that?
Oh, absolutely. There's actually a book called Crossroads, I think it was called. I have to look it up now, but it was an anthology that was put together. I contributed a piece to, and it was all about that, how the modern movement is swinging back toward the older views, and especially how the African traditional religions are having a massive impact on modern Western occultism. So back when I was talking to Oshani Lele late into the night, I was the only one, like I performed Abramelin by myself. I had no one but him to refer to. And no one was using the grimoires. In fact, you'll notice that my first book is called Secrets of the Magical Grimoires. That's not what I called the book. I called it Secrets of the Grimoires. Llewellyn added the word magical because they didn't believe anyone would know what a grimoire was. So that right there is a good indication of how things have changed since then. And, I mean, you've heard the phrase, when it's time to steam engine, it's going to steam engine. I think it was really time for this occult revival, this old magic revival to happen. I mean, You see the world is changing in a massive way. You know, when everything was nice and comfortable here in America, we could sit on our high horse and be philosophical and poo-poo all the little natives running around doing their folk magic, and we had it all figured out because it was all just in the mind. But as soon as our government goes to hell, the economy crashes, wars start breaking out all over, the rise of fascism is facing, we're facing that right now. The world's getting a hell of a lot more dangerous, and people have real problems that they are now concerned about. So suddenly all of this, it's all just in the mind stuff, is starting to break up. People are going back to their instincts a little more. Another thing that I noticed, I pointed this out before too, is right around this time, when a lot, like my book had just come out, Jake Kent was just starting to really catch on and become popular, and right then was when Katrina hit New Orleans. So right in the middle of this, just for example, I don't want to divert too much, but going back to Oshani Lele, he's a white man, and when he was initiated into his house, this was a controversy. This was something that was discussed and debated heatedly in their community. Should white people be allowed in? Now it's common. They're all over the place, and that's because of Katrina. Katrina literally caused a second African diaspora, so that all of this hoodoo and voodoo that had been centered in New Orleans and Louisiana suddenly got spread across the United States and the world. I mean, people from New Orleans went all over the place, and with them they took their system and their wisdom and their magic. And I mean, all of these things have all come together: the change in the world and just the internet itself and the new access we have to talk to each other and share ideas. And by the way, there's no such thing as cultural appropriation in magic. That's nonsense. All magic is syncretic, and we learn what we can from each other, and what culture you come from doesn't matter, because magic is the same the world over. So we're learning a lot from each other now that we weren't previously. So all these things have come together, and people are looking back over the past, 100 years or so and thinking, well, maybe this psychological model thing, maybe it fit its time and place, but maybe it doesn't fit now the way it used to. And people are starting to return. Like I said, they're going back to their instincts. They're going back to something more primal. And when your family is facing problems, when you've got financial difficulties, you're not sure if you're going to be able to keep your home, you're not sure if you're going to be able to see your family, you're not sure where your next meal might be coming from, then the psychological stuff goes away, and you start asking for help, real help that can make real changes in the world. And that's what we're looking at right now.
Well, in my own videos and things that I do, I always try to be unbiased, and everyone has an opinion and stuff like that. But in my own view, I think that the psychological model could be very dangerous when you try to bring it to grimoires. I don't want to go into all the details around it, but the first time that I worked with the Goetia, the Ars Goetia, I was 19 years old, and I approached it as it's all just in my head, it's psychological, and I got horribly burned. It was horrible. And I've heard of many other people that also have negative experiences when they try to apply it's all in my head. And some people, they never seem to have any major issues, but still, I think it could be very dangerous. I think it's important to look at these things, these spirits are real, and that is the reason that the equipment is needed, because, you're dealing with a technology, the various aspects. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So, a person coming from, say, the Golden Dawn, a Thalemic system, and they want to practice with the Key of Solomon, and they come at it as a psychological thing. Okay, maybe 8 or 9 people out of 10, they'll be fine. They'll use that, and they'll have their nice psychological experience, and they'll move on. But the question is, who are you, and how are you wired? Like I said before, your belief doesn't really matter that much. You may believe it's all in your head, but if you happen to be sensitive, if the spirits can reach out and connect with you, and you start employing these older methods thinking that it's all going to be in your head, but you're wired in such a way that you can perceive them, and suddenly they show up, or something else happens, or a negative result to a request that you make comes through, or whatever mistake is made, something happened that really shows it. Oh my God, this is real. And let me tell you that many a fundamentalist Christian has been made by that exact experience.
I've seen it. I mean, the thing is, like, yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, even if 9 out of 10 people are fine, they're like, I've been doing this for years and I'm fine. Like, I have, I've gotten emails of horror stories, like horrible. I mean, it's not a fun experience. I think it's important to approach this with the proper reverence and respect. So yeah, so that's part of the reason that I mean, there are lots of authors out there, but that's part of the reason that I really appreciate your work, because you're starting to bring things back to more of a classical worldview when working with these spirits. I found your Essential Enochian Grimoire to be literally the best book out there, modern author, hands down.
Awesome, thank you very much. I'm glad it's been useful.
Hey, Robert, you had some kind of a question about 2 forms of evocation or something. What was that?
Well, a while back, maybe a year ago, I believe it was you, Aaron. Yeah, it was you. And you said that there are 2 forms of spirit evocation. More of a shamanistic version and the exorcist version of evocation. So
Okay.
I'm interested in hearing that, at least in the context of the time. I don't know if it's valid or not. Or if you still follow that dichotomy, but do you still follow it?
Yeah, well, actually, I can't take credit for that. In fact, I'm kind of ashamed of myself, because if you read Secrets of the Grimoires, there's no mention of that in there. When I wrote that, which was, I guess, in 98 and 99 is when I wrote that, I still hadn't come to this realization. So it was actually Jake Jake Stratton Kent, who pointed this out to me. And he said that if you look closely at the Grimoires, there's 2 currents. It's not so much 2 styles of evocation, though I think it does amount to that. But you're actually looking at 2 different groups of people, is what he's saying, writing the Grimoires. On the one hand, you have your exorcist, the medieval exorcist, the guy who worked for the church. It was his job to lay hands on new converts as they came in to cast demons out of them. And it was also his job to be the town faith healer. So if you got sick, you had a choice. You could either go out into the country to find a local wise woman or witch and take herbs and medicines from her, or you could go to the church and they would exorcise you and try to cast the demon of sickness out of you. So this exorcist, had to be a successful faith healer. I mean, if he wasn't good at what he did, he wouldn't be in that role. So these guys, when they were writing their magic, and you see this like in the Key of Solomon and the Goetia, these are the guys who wrote the spirit curses. They're the ones who take the very high and mighty, I am the image of God, and you will do what I say, or else I'm going to dangle you in an iron box over this fire until you comply. Because that's unfortunately, and this is really a whole different subject. I have issues with the Catholic methods of exorcism, but one of the techniques that they would employ is for a human, if you were being exorcised, they would tie you down and literally torture you. They would make you physically uncomfortable and cause you pain until the demon in you couldn't stand it anymore and would flee. This still goes on today. If you ever hear stories, they'll come through the news every once in a while. Somebody in Africa murdered somebody during an exorcism. That's usually what's happening. They're torturing the person, trying to drive out the spirit, and they go too far and they kill the person. So obviously I have issues with that form of exorcism. But those are the techniques you're seeing in the spirit curses and the grimoire. You take the sigil of the entity and you consecrated it, you've linked it to the entity, and you pierce it with pins and you burn it with fire, and you seal it in iron boxes with stinking fumes and hold it over the flame and all that horrible stuff. That's exorcism. Now, the other group of people writing the grimoires, For example, a lot of the material in the first book of Agrippa's 3 book of occult philosophy, chapter, at least in Mather's edition, it's chapter 23 of the Key of Solomon, which concerns making sacrifices of the spirit. These sources, these are written by an older group of people. Basically, it's holdovers from the ancient pagan practices. So like, for instance, in chapter 23 of the Key of Solomon, there's not a triangle and a circle and threats and torture. You're told to set up a table and lay out a feast and actually sit down and have dinner with these entities and ask them for what you need and tell them that if you'll help me, then I'll give you more offerings later. And it's pleasant and it's friendly and it's respectful. That's the older group that's writing that. They treat the spirits with respect and honor because these are the old gods. These are the gods of nature that we're talking about. And the Christians just called them demons. Actually everyone called them demons. Demon just meant spirit. But the Christians decided that demon, quote unquote, meant evil spirit. And they called them all evil spirits. And so that's what you're seeing in the grimoires is literally a conflict going on between these two groups, often in the same text. Like the Key of Solomon, you have one chapter that tells you to torture the spirits and another one that tells you not to. So over the years, I've kind of developed I've leaned more toward the older group. The older group, by the way, that's Goetia. When you hear like Agrippa or one of the other grimoire authors talking about, oh, those evil necromancers, those goets, those howlers at the moon, their evil, dirty ways, they go out and work with the spirits, and the spirits rush to them to serve them. The spirits can't wait to give them everything they ask for, and they're evil for that. But us, we treat the spirits with disrespect. We beat them, we torture them. And if we get anything out of the spirits, it's only because we force it out of them, and that's why we're better. So you see, this is what you're reading in the grimoires. It's actually a conflict between these two groups and these two philosophies. And like I said, I've leaned ever closer toward the old Goetia philosophy, the old treat these spirits with respect, feed them, build working relationships with them, because that's where the magic comes from. I've tried the other methods. Believe me, I did way back when I was young and stupid. And if you torture an entity sigil, you know what you're going to get? A pissed off spirit. You're going to get an enemy on the other side. It's not going to do what you want just because you're torturing it. In fact, you're going to get the opposite. And you're going to put yourself into a war mindset. And now you're at war with all of the entities of the underworld. And you don't want to go down that road. I mean, that's the Catholic way, to be at war with the underworld. But that's not the reality of the situation. You don't want to adopt that mentality.
Isn't there more of a middle way? For example, if you look at the Greek magical papyri, there's compulsion, but it doesn't seem to be as, I'm not sure what the word is. You do see a certain level of compulsion and stuff with some of the entities from the Greek magical papyri, but like you said, it's not like they're putting them in a stinking box and holding it over a fire or something like that. What do you think about that?
It's a little more about the technology, and it kind of depends on the spirit too. Like when I'm dealing with the archangels or my holy guardian angel, there's no compulsion there. Like Agrippa says, they're not compelled to come down here. You invite them down here into objects that they find pleasing, with incenses that they find pleasing, and foods and nice things. But then the spirits of nature, the lower spirits, like your familiars, them you have to be a little more forceful with. Again, you're not going to disrespect them, but you are in charge. You're the boss in that situation. You're the client, and you're the one that has them working for you. So you can take a commanding tone in the right places. You can be in charge of, especially in Goetia uses the grand seals, the grand seal of Solomon, the hexagram of Solomon. There's 1,000 names for it, but it's usually a very elaborate symbol inscribed on parchment, and it has to be done in a certain way at a certain time. And this thing becomes your badge of authority. And if you're dealing with the spirits of nature or the underworld and you're holding that badge of authority, it's like you're a cop. You are in authority now. You are speaking for God. You are an ambassador for God, and you're speaking with that authority. So you can be commanding. But that doesn't mean you can be disrespectful. I mean, ambassadors don't get very far if they abandon the arts of diplomacy and just become rude and threatening and hateful. So yeah, there are places to be commanding, and there are places to not be commanding.
Right. So it's more, you're still in control and authority, but you're not disrespecting, and so like more with just like wild forces sometimes need to be directed and controlled, right? Kind of like that.
Correct, and especially with the wild forces, the earthly forces, the spirits of nature, they're just like any other living being. They want to have shelter, companionship, food, and sustenance, and to be comfortable and to be happy. And they want to expend as little energy getting those things as possible. So whether you're training a dog, or you are working with a contractor, or working with your spirits, in any of those cases, I'm forgetting. I'm totally losing my train of thought here. What was the question you just asked me? I'm sorry.
Well, like wild forces need to be directed, and because you were talking
right.
about,
sorry,
you can
that
be
was a total
authoritative. You could be authoritative, like the boss, but without
and that
being
was
disrespectful.
that was a total brain fart on my part. Sorry about that. I totally lost it. But yeah, so you can be in control without being disrespectful, just the way an ambassador can do, or a police officer if he's arresting somebody. I mean, you'll have police officers that go out there and pull out their gun and yell curses at you and scream at you, and they usually don't make it very, unfortunately, they make it further than they should, but they shouldn't make it very far acting that way. Whereas an officer who can actually do his job calmly and with respect to the people that he's working with is going to get a heck of a lot further.
So like in a grimoire, for example, sort of this middle way would be to use the conjurations with authority and all of this, while basically putting out a pleasant offering at the same time. But you're still using the conjurations and basically being the boss, essentially.
Yeah, you're basically going to be in control. And, like I said, they want to get the good things from you without having to work for them as hard. So that's where I lost my train of thought. Regardless of whether it's an animal or a person, or an employee or anyone you're trying to train to work for you, they're going to want to get the maximum out of the relationship and for the least expenditure of energy back. So they can get lazy, and if they can take control of the situation, I want more offerings. Okay, well, now I want more offerings, and okay, now for the same thing you asked for last week, I want more offerings, and I'm going to put off working for you. Well, I would have done it for you, but I need a little bit more, and I need a little bit more, and little by little, they'll just get to the point where they're in control, and now they're demanding from you, oh, how come I didn't get the money I needed to live this week? And they'll say, because you didn't make X, Y, and Z offering. Make those offerings and we'll take care of you. You don't make those offerings and we'll punish you. Now you've gotten yourself into like what you saw in the Old Testament with those gods. Thou shalt give me 10,000 bullocks per day, and otherwise I shall take your land from you and send your people scattered across the nations and punish them for generations into the future because you didn't do what I. So we don't want to get to that situation. You have to stay in charge. You're the human.
And it's like they're forming a magical spirit union against you, and you're the magician or the business owner, and
right,
they're organizing the strike against you.
Yeah, and you have to organize the contract. And if you are a terrible, terrible employer, if you neglect them, you don't feed them, you don't take care of them, but you demand. See, it works both ways. Then yeah, they can union up on you. They can just say, look, we're not working with you. And then you lose your spirit contacts. They leave you. But on the other hand, it can go bad, like we were just talking about, the other direction. They can demand more and more and produce less and less. So then you have to be the one to say, you're not producing, goodbye. You're fired. And I've done that before. I've had familiars, and I've said, I had one familiar that just loved to push my buttons. He figured out how to make me angry. And I'm a Celt, so it's not hard to make me angry. And he figured out how to do that. And he loved pushing my buttons, man. I caught on to it after several weeks that he was doing it, and he was actually laughing. He was having a ball. And when I came to that realization, I said, get the fuck out of here. I will never speak your name or write it again. Nobody outside of me will ever even know what your name was. Go back to hell and tell Lucifer why the fuck you just showed back up there. And I have never spoken to or spoken the name of that entity since. And that entity was replaced, actually quite a while later, but he was replaced. And it turned out, this is funny, the replacement spirit had been with me since I was a child. And I knew that because of the name that he gave me. And I had not known that I thought I had made that word up as a kid. And it turned out I hadn't made the word up. The name actually meant something. I had to look it up, and that's what told me what was going on. And he had been with me since I was a child. So it's almost like this other familiar had just been a placeholder anyway. And I had to take it upon myself to say, I'm not letting you do this to me. You're not working for me. You're taking control of this relationship. Get out of here. And once I dismissed him, and like I said, it was quite a while. I think it was several years before I finally went and got a replacement for him. And this one was my spirit, and always had been. It was really funny. And since then, the results I've had have been incredible.
Now,
what do you think? What do you think about more of the? What do you think more about the approach of just? Well, like some people working with the Ars Goetia, but they cut out all the circles, they cut out the lamens, they cut out all the tools and everything, and they just like basically get a layman and just light a candle, and then but they give an offering. Like, what do you think about that approach?
The problem with that is someone who tries that is basically putting the cart before the horse. And what I mean by that is, when you look in the grimoires, you are not looking at instructions for how you must work with spirits forever. The grimoires, and this is why they're called grammars, this is why they're called beginner's books, and it's also why the keys of Solomon are called keys, because they just unlock the door. They contain spells and methods by which you gain contact with the spirit. So take the Goetia. You're going to summon, I don't know, Andros, and you've never summoned Andros before. You do not know this entity. This is a stranger to you. So you have the circle, the triangle, all the tools, all the regalia, the incense, the hexagram of Solomon, and all the pentacles that you're supposed to use. This is the technology by which you open the gateways between the physical and spiritual worlds, contact that particular spirit, and call him and stay safe from him, because he's an unknown spirit. That's what the circle is for. That's what the triangle is for. You don't really know him yet, so you're going to talk to him, and you're going to ask him for a familiar. You're going to ask to work with him. You're going to ask him to give you a familiar that you can work with. And from that point forward, now once this is done, you've gotten a spirit from Andros. You've gotten a little mini Andros for yourself. You've put it in a brass vessel. Now you don't need all those tools in the circles. Now you've got a vessel you can put on an altar, set offerings and candles and incense in front of it, and just talk to that spirit anytime you want. So can you sit down there just with a lamen and a candle and talk to a spirit? Yes, but it's kind of stupid to try to do that before you've actually called the spirit and made a deal with them and actually have that spirit there in your house. Otherwise, you're just looking at an empty talisman and talking to yourself.
So all of those things are used to establish that initial contact and link. It's kind of like setting up, like you each have a mode of communication, like you're connected, and then it's easier. So it sets up communication, but also it is protective. Like the circles and all that is still protective, I guess, because that initial contact could be hazardous. Possibly, if you don't know the spirit, it doesn't know you, and there hasn't been a relationship established yet.
Correct. And of course, remember now, in the old days, I don't really deal with this much because it hasn't been an issue, but at least in the old days, they were very concerned with spirits showing up pretending to be the spirit that was called. I think they were a little over paranoid about that, but a lot of that protection and a lot of the triangle. Remember, the triangle is there to get the spirit to tell the truth, not to help it manifest or any of that stuff. The triangle is there. It even says that in the book. If you think the spirit is lying, then draw a triangle and command it into the triangle. Or some of the spirits that will say, you have to summon the spirit into a triangle or it will lie to you. But that's the point of the triangle. So it's about trust. And, let's say you summon, Beelzebub or something, and you don't really know how he's going to react to you. You don't know if he's going to lie to you. You don't even know if it's really Beelzebub that's going to show up. And again, this is the mindset of the medieval mage. So you summon the spirit, you put it into a triangle, and then you start all of that, who are you? What is your name? What is your sigil? Do you serve God? Do you serve this entity? Do you serve, and you work out who the entity is, and then, of course, you go into your petition, what it is you want the spirit to do, and how that relationship will be built. And then once the deals are made, just like at the end of Abramelin, you summon the spirits and get an oath from them. And once that deal, that contract has been made, then you don't need the circle and all of that stuff. Now you've got a working relationship and an understanding. And also, I was going to add on to the end of that. Speaking of the medieval mindset, don't forget, like when you're looking in the Goetia, that ritual setup is not just for those 72 spirits. You're actually intended. You'll notice that the prayer for the triangle to Michael says, Michael, bind the spirit which disturbs this place into this triangle. So you're actually intended to take that stuff with you over to people's houses when they say that they have hauntings or if someone's possessed. And you're supposed to actually conjure the spirit out of the house or out of the person and into the triangle and into a vessel so that you can take it out. So there's your context. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can use that triangle to pull in poltergeists or whatever else that's being troublesome, basically.
That is absolutely its intent, yes. Because remember, these guys, they did this stuff for a living. I guess kind of like I do nowadays, but that's what they did. You would have a possession, or someone would get sick in your house, and you would see that as a possession, or you would think that your house was haunted, and that you would go to the local Solomonic magician, whoever that was, and they would come over with the book and the holy water and all that stuff, and they'd draw out the circles, and they'd actually cast the spirit out of the house. And if they were really good at what they did, they probably then took it home and put it to work. But either way, their job was to actually relieve you, the client, of the afflicting spirit. So that's what a lot of that art, especially in the Lemegeton and the Goetia, is really what that's aimed at. It's an exorcist technique.
Well, with the Enochian magic, I mean, I really loved your essentially Enochian grimoire. Like I said, it's hands down the best books I've read on the subject. But so in Enochian magic, like this came up, like, I'm in like some Enochian groups, or I used to be, and it's like a lot of people have the attitude that, you don't really need all these tools, it's just, it's like it's all just in your head. Like you don't really need a ring or holy table or any of that. But like in John Dee's system, like basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but you use these things to establish contact, especially, and once you go through your 19-day, 18-day period, then it should be easier. But like these things are needed, they are important. Like this is a discussion that I was having. Like, people are so biased towards the psychological model. People nowadays, they're like, you're not a real magician if you need tools, or you don't need any tools. But what I was going to say is, like, why, my attitude is this: why would John Dee spend painstaking hours over a period of years getting very detailed information, very detailed instructions, if it was just all in his head and he didn't need it? Like, that's wasting years, hours a day, like a grueling process of getting this information. Like, if none of this was important, then why even go through that process? So I don't know, what is your thoughts on that?
I actually think Stephen Skinner put this the best. I believe it was in his Greco-Egyptian magic book, I should say, where he stated that, and this is strictly from a scholarly perspective. This has nothing to do with interpretation or mysticism at all. He says, just look at the archaeological and historical record, and you will find that magic, the technique, the technology we're talking about here, tends to be the same throughout history, no matter where or when in the world you're looking at it. It doesn't matter if it's Eastern or Western. It doesn't matter if it's modern or ancient. It's the same techniques that keep coming up time and time again. Even if cultures are completely isolated from one another, they'll still independently come up with the same magical techniques. And what this tells us...
What are the basic aspects of the technique? Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Well, that's kind of a big subject. But the point at this where we're at this point in the conversation is that if this was all in your head and it was just a fantasy, you can make it up as you go along, then necessarily in the historical record, that is what you would see. You would see different techniques that are suited to different people at different places at different times. So the fact that it's always the same and it's always the same technology is what tells us that this is objective. It's not all in your head.
So anything can't just be anything you want. You can replace this incense with whatever, and a magic circle. You can just use a magic square, and it's all about what resonates and feels nice.
What feels best. Yeah. Now, see, Now this goes right back to what we were saying. You know, these old masters did not view this as being psychological. And if you do view it as psychological, just like I said to Oshani, none of this makes sense. None of this is necessary. It is outdated, superstitious nonsense. You know, frog's eyes and eagle's brains and magical timing. I mean, what difference does it make if I do my spell on Sunday at 2 p.m. or if I do it at Monday at 4:30? What difference does this make to the? It's 4:30. It's noon somewhere, right? It's the day and hour of the moon. Let's say if I'm supposed to work the moon, it's the day and hour of the moon somewhere. And even if it's not somewhere today, then somewhere in time and space, it's that day. So why should I bother with magical time? You know, and if it all is just in the head, but the moment you start to see these entities as real, and this is the point I wanted to make too, about the magical technology. All of magic, and like I said, it's the same no matter time or place throughout the world, and so all of magic, it really boils down to this. You are attempting to communicate with an entity that is very different from you in a physical sense. They can't really exist in the same place that we can as physical beings. So in order to communicate and meet with these entities in that ambassadorial role I was describing, you have to create a place that both you can exist in and they can exist in, like a diver going down into a shark tank. If you want to study sharks, you can stand on the beach and scream shark all day, and none of them are going to come up onto the beach and let you study them. You're going to have to go into the tank. You're going to have to get wet. You're going to have to go into their environment. But at the same time, you can't just jump into their environment. You go out and jump off the side of a boat. You're shark bait. So you have to create what they call between the worlds. You guys have heard that before, right? Let's go between the worlds. Well, this is what that means. You are stepping 1 foot out of the physical and into the spiritual. You are creating a pocket universe that exists not quite in their world and not quite in our world. And every piece of that technology serves that. The table, the tools, the regalia, the incense that you use, the colors that you use, the numbers of everything that are around. You are creating a sympathetic, magical environment. Just like going back to the ATRs. Their familiar spirits are called Ganga spirits, and their Gangas are actually, this is very Goetia. They put them in iron pots, and they'll put chains around the pot. But this binds the spirit to the pot. It doesn't trap the spirit in the pot. Same thing with the Goetic the brass vessel in the Goetia. You're not trapping the spirit in the vessel. You're just binding it to the vessel, and then they can work with the spirit. But in that pot, in the Ganga, in the ATRs, they will build a microcosm that reflects the nature of that spirit. So let's say they have a spirit of the ocean. Their familiar comes from the ocean. They will have fish and seaweed and coral and shells and sand from the bottom of the sea, and everything that they can find that they can pack into that pot that will literally turn that pot into a little ocean so that the spirit can live there. And the same thing, if they have one that with the spirit from the river, they'll build a little river in that pot. Or if the spirit's from the desert, they'll build a desert environment in that pot. And you're doing the same thing with your magic, with the circles and the talismans and all of that, all those accoutrements. You're building an environment, a vibratory space that they can coexist in with you, and you communicate with them. So if you take all of that technology and throw it out, you're not building that space. You're not opening the lines of communication between you and that spirit. Not to mention the fact that when you do create the tools and you consecrate them properly, they are also living things. They are also real spirits, objective from yourself. Your tools are your familiars. So your knife is a living creature. Your sword is a living creature. Your wand is a living creature. So when you wield these things in your magic, those spirits are active on the astral. They're doing things for you. And if you say, these are just props, I don't need them, you are literally taking your familiar spirits and subtracting them from the equation. And now you have to do it all on your own. And by the way, you have no idea what it was they did for you on the astral side of things. So again, you're reduced back to being that scientist standing on the shore screaming shark, wondering why he's not learning anything about sharks.
Yeah, honestly, I think the subjectivist model and psychological model of magic, I think it has its place, but I think that it really tends to just ruin grimoire magic, to just say, well, anything could be anything I want it to be, as long as it feels good and
as long as it works for me, you think so.
It's all in the intent. And yes, intent is important, but there's an actual technology. These things are there for a reason. Like, why would these things be historically part of this technology for hundreds, even thousands of years, if there was no reason? It's like basically saying we know better than centuries or thousands of years of magicians because we have our New Age books. It's like we know better than them.
Correct.
Without the kind of experience that they have. Yeah, as you were saying before, Aaron, though, or you were agreeing with that, we've established that they don't know better, essentially, because it's not working or it's turning out wrong, and that's why so many people are coming back to this spirit model of seeing things outside of themselves.
Yeah. Now, I will say one thing. Part of the confusion that comes in with this whole psychological thing is that, and I even mentioned this before, there is a psychological aspect to working magic. Part of creating that environment is also psychological. One of the biggest pitfalls, though, is that spirits are not physical creatures. If the spirit is standing in front of you, there is no body that light is reflecting off to your eyes. When it speaks to you, it's not vibrating air that bounces off your eardrums. They're communicating to you with what we today would call telepathy. It's mind to mind. Even Agrippa says this. They impress their messages onto your mind just like an image impresses itself onto your retina. There's nothing. It's immediate. There's no other medium that has to transmit it to you. Unlike sound, where it has to vibrate air in order to get into your ear. So they're communicating with telepathy. They just impress their messages directly on your mind. This is where psychology does come in, because the spirits are limited in their communication with you by what is already in your brain. They cannot present to you an idea or a symbol that is not in your brain for them to make use of. They can't speak to you in a foreign language that you have no knowledge of, because you don't have that language in your head to understand it and to speak in it. And the way they appear, the forms that they take, will depend on your psychology. You see this a lot in modern religion. Like, how can you have one church who worships a Jesus that is loving and kind and gives to the poor, and anyone who walks into that church and says, I need help, is going to get it without question. And then just down the street, you can have Westboro, and their Jesus is hateful and sadistic and slimy and evil. Now, they're both Jesus. How do you have this disparity between the two? That's where their psychology is coming in. Westboro is corrupting their Jesus. Their connection to Jesus is based on their mindset. Hate, anger, fear. And therefore, that's what they get from the other side. Whereas the church down the street that is kind and generous and loving, that's the Jesus that they get. So psychology does come into play in it. But ultimately, the Jesus, the force that they're naming Jesus, that they're dealing with, is real and objective. It's just their experience of it, their interpretation of it, that will be subjective. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that goes kind of about what you were saying with the two types of the evocation, where you had the chain rattlers and the sigil pokers and that, and then you had the offering and the nice way, the reverential way of dealing with the spirits. Same spirits, different outcome. You get what you get. Exactly. Or you get what you give. Okay.
You get what you give, yes. Or in a lot of cases, just what you expect. Like, look at Dee. We have fun going over Dee's Enochian material because that's cool, but if you really take the time to read his journals, the angels spent a heck of a lot more time giving those men sermons than they did giving them magical secrets. They preached and preached, and I tell you what, some of it is the most fundamentalist 1500s English Protestant nonsense you've ever heard in your life. And it's because these angels were coming through in the way Dee expected them to. A great example is that infamous incident where the angels discovered that Kelly was using Goetia behind Dee's back. And boy, they raised hell. They stopped the sessions, and we will not go forward even one more inch unless that evil man right there brings all of his evil books to us and formally renounces all the evil doctrines those nasty, disgusting, pathetic spirits told him, and he has to burn all of his goetic tools and books, and then, maybe then, if he's truly repentant, we'll go on with the session. Meanwhile, I've been working with these Enochian angels for years, and they have no problem with me working with my familiars or any of the Goetia stuff that I've explored and practiced. They have no problem with it because they're not approaching me, and I'm not approaching them in the way Dee was. Therefore, they're not approaching me back in that way. They're not giving me a bunch of fundamentalist sermons because I'm not wired that way. That's not how I'm approaching them or how I'm perceiving them.
Well, not to confuse these systems and not to like blend things together, but just to use an analogy that many modern occultists could, relate to. It seems sort of like how the light. Now that I'm saying this, I even bring it up. This is not Qabalah, folks, but just to bring in this symbolism, it kind of struck me as kind of like the light of Tiferet or higher consciousness filters through Yesod to reach us. Like it filters through the mind, basically, subconscious or whatever you want to say. Kind of like that. It's like a filter, or like it passes through the sieve.
And your subconscious is always going to affect what you see when you work with these spirits. Absolutely.
Switching gears a little bit, if you guys don't mind, one of the most powerful, one of the most impactful, and yet very little understood systems of grimoire magic is the Abramelin. And I know that you actually teach a class on the Abramelin. Are you still accepting, or is that an ongoing type of thing, or could you tell us a little bit about your class and what you offer?
The class was kind of a unique idea. It's not just, you can just take the class. It's only one class a month, and I do it for 7 months. I'll go over step by step the entire process and all of the philosophy and context behind it and what it all means. But what makes the class unique is it wasn't really set up just to be a class. If it had been that, I just would have had it once a week until it was over. But I actually wanted this to be, I wanted to have the setup so that students could take the classes while they're going through the Abramelin process. So the first class was in March, just before Abramelin started. Actually, about 3 weeks before Abramelin began for this year, which began on March 31st, I believe it was. And then we haven't even done the second class yet. That's going to be on the 21st, so in just a few days. And on top of that, I also, per month, you can sign up for consults as well. So it's kind of a package. You get the classes for free if you sign up for the consults. And that way you can communicate with me a couple of times a month, just on, questions that you have. You want to know if you're doing things right. There's no group working. It's not like the class gets together and does an Abramelin. In fact, in the class group, I've kept the students from talking to each other too much, other than just giving advice and helpful hints. But other than that, everyone goes through it by themselves, but you do have resource not only to me through the consult, but also to the group, if you have questions or concerns. So it was a nice way, because, like I said, when I did it, no one was doing this. No one even knew what a grimoire was. No one wanted to touch them if they did know what grimoires were. Hell, I was being told to leave those silly things alone and get on with real, quote unquote, real magic, which by that they meant psychological magic. But I had to do it all by myself. So if I had a doubt, I just had to wait until it was over and ask my angel, So I just had to push forward through blind faith through so much of it. And I thought it would be really nice and safer, because not only do students need somebody to sound off of and ask questions of, someone who's been there before, but it's also, I've seen people, I've had people, students come to me, not my students, but I have had students, aspirants come to me and ask for advice and help through their Abramelin. And I've always been willing to do that simply because I knew how hard it was to be alone when I did it. And I would say at least twice, I had an incident where they would get all the way through the operation, the months of preparation, and they would get right to that final 7 days. And that's where the actual rite of Abramelin is, that 7-day process. And I would find out they didn't have any idea what they were doing. They didn't know how to contact the spirits. They didn't know how to scry. They didn't know. They were like, okay, what do I do? And I'm like, well, this is not the time to be asking this, buddy. You should have told me this 6 months ago that you didn't know any of this stuff. So I realized that the best way forward for people is to have a structured class where they can learn step by step how to do the operation, and then have a fallback to ask me further questions if they need to. So that's going on right now. I'm still letting people in if they just want to take the classes, because we record all the classes, and they've only missed the first one so far. So you can jump in at any point and just listen to the previously recorded classes, still participate in the group. But if you're wanting to do Abramelin, you'll want to, wait till next year, because it's already started for this year.
Awesome. And I just want listeners out there to, have a little information on the different range of services that you offer, and, different ways to get in touch and access your material. Of course, you've actually got probably the most active grimoire group on Facebook. I don't have it in front of me. I think it's Solomonic Secrets of the Grimoires. Is that right?
Yep. That's it. Solomonic, and then the subtitle is the title of my book.
Yeah, it's like a really active group. So when I upload this to YouTube or wherever I upload it to, Facebook, whatever, I'll be sure and put a link to the Facebook group. So any seekers that are, listening to this podcast that are interested, if you're on Facebook, you need to join this Facebook group, and you'll be able to access a wealth of material and be able to talk to people that have a lot of knowledge on this subject matter. And also, I'll be sure and put that in a link in the description. So what is the story behind that group? Like, how exactly did you get started with the Facebook group?
Well, it actually began back in the old days when everyone was still using Yahoo groups. There was my group, which I think was called Secrets of the Grimoires then too. And a couple others, the Abermelin group run by Athena Wallander and some others. They were really active back in the day. I mean, we did a lot of really good work. That's where I met Jake Stratton Kent. That's where I met Brother Malak, a lot of these guys. I think Joseph Peterson was in there, if I recall. But at any rate, once, Facebook came out, I held out against Facebook for so long. It was like the Borg coming for me. You will be assimilated. And eventually I was. So I finally got onto Facebook. And I was glad I did because it wasn't relatively speaking, it wasn't that long before Yahoo groups completely imploded. I don't know. Did you guys ever were you guys ever on Yahoo groups at all back in the day?
I did a little bit.
Do you remember when they imploded, when they completely revamped the entire system and made it almost impossible to even use the groups anymore? You couldn't search the archives. It was terrible. But at any rate, that's when I just decided I'd had enough. I mean, Yahoo had been changing things a lot, and that was the last straw. So I went over to Facebook, and I just imported it over there and invited everyone from the old group to the new one. And, of course, on Facebook, I had made connections with, people like, Joe Peterson. I think I may have known him from previously, actually. No, I did know him from previous, actually, because he gave me permissions on a lot of the material I used in my Enochian books. But let's see, Jake Kent came from the old Solomonic group with me. Took me a while to convince him to get back onto Facebook, in fact. He had left it. Who else did I have in there? Frater Ashan is a pretty popular name right now. I got him in there. Brother Malak was in there for a little while. He's moved on since. But I just tried to gather together, my friends and stuff that I knew were kind of the big movers and shakers in this particular movement. And got them all into one place. And for anyone who's wanting to join, I should warn you, from the very beginning, it has been probably the strictest group you'll ever encounter on Facebook. You have to answer 3 questions to get in, and you have to answer them right. A lot of people get denied because they don't answer the 3 questions. Once you get in, the topic is strictly classical, old school, pre-Golden Dawn, Solomonic magic, and related subjects. And so people want to come in and if they want to start talking about magic in general or just have general psychological discussions or philosophical discussions. They want to talk about the Qabalah, the Golden Dawn. A big one is they want to talk about Aleister Crowley. All of this stuff is off topic, so none of that is allowed in there. It's a very low noise to signal ratio. You're going to be able to get in there and see good discussions and actually come away with something that will change how you practice and expand your understanding of the material. It's a resource. Is what it is, more than just a discussion area.
That really kind of inspired us, combined with kind of a negative experience. Robert and I, we were trying to be open-minded, and we worked with this psychological model with this individual, which, of course, I'm not going to name any names, but we used like this really psychological model, kind of a new agey approach to contacting spirits. Like, we visualized a sigil in our throat chakra as we drifted off to sleep, and we're trying to be open-minded, but we had like a really negative experience using this method. It was horrible, and we've talked to other people that have had a negative experience using this shoddy method. And this individual, which, again, I'm not going to name any names, but like just totally wrapped up in the psychological model, that combined with kind of your group kind of inspired us to create our own Facebook group where it is specifically just for people that want to go by the book grimoire method. Because, like, there's so many groups that talk about chaos magic or Wicca or Thelema or whatever. Like, there's virtually nowhere where you can actually go buy the book grimoires. And if there is a place that is open to that, where there are people that are knowledgeable, so that kind of inspired us to create our traditional grimoires and classical magic group. So yeah,
I've been in there reading through that one actually. I think I joined it maybe a month ago or so.
Yeah. And another thing I wanted to go over is Doc Solomon Curio Company. I hope I said that right. I ordered your...
Occult Curios.
Oh, awesome! Yeah,
that's the word I was missing. I knew it was something. We were talking about it beforehand, and I'm like, is it Doc Solomon's curio cabinet? I can't remember what it's called, but I knew curio was in there somewhere, and I was missing a word. All right, continue. Sorry, guys.
That's cool. Yeah, I ordered your occult calendar, and I found it to really be awesome. So, what all do you offer with the Doc Solomon? Like, what all do you have? I know you have sell oils that have been blessed by a priest, obviously because you're an ordained priest, and all kinds of stuff, occult books, or what all do you have?
Yeah, the whole concept of Doc Solomon's was to create an occult shop that specializes in the old magic, especially the grimoires. That's why I wanted Solomon's name to be in the title of the store. So that people know this is where you can come to get Key of Solomon materials. And so, I mean, there's a lot of things that the grimoires call for that you're not even going to find in, say, Hoodoo or voodoo shops like Botanic is. You're not going to find thread spun by a young virgin. You're not going to find archangel oils and planetary oils, and you're not going to find planetary. Like, you can go into any Botanic and find tons of floor washes, but you're not going to find them dedicated to 7 planets. So, the incenses, oils, standard Solomonic holy water, Epiphany made holy water. We've got stuff that's been blessed via mass. We have most of our items are consecrated according to the Key of Solomon the King. We make custom talismans, magic circles. Right now, we're expanding into regalia and robes. And later this year, we're going to be expanding again into things like knives, like the black and white hilted knife, wooden trumpets, bells. So all these really obscure things that you need to do this old magic. But because this is kind of a new and growing movement, there wasn't really a resource for people to do that. Unless you did have the resources to make all this stuff yourself, which can take, as I know, decades to actually get everything together. So I just thought it would be nice to have this resource. And of course, not only do we sell the object, but we do services as well. We do candle lightings on the archangel. We have altars set up in our home to all 7 archangels of the planets. So we'll light candles on any archangel altar someone wants, and we actually perform a whole spell. We read the petition, burn incense, and it's a whole little ritual we do. We consecrate talismans, and if you have a big need, we'll actually do evocations. We'll actually call angels and spirits and question them and give you the answers that they give. So we try to basically cover everything in the grimoire and Western old magic area of occultism.
Can I ask you something along those same lines, Aaron? As an aspiring priest and occult, I don't want to say businessman, as it were, but how do you ever receive opposition to those certain people that say, oh, well, you shouldn't be charging money for these services, or things of that nature, and how do you deal with that? How would you advise someone like myself or maybe other people out there that feel this is their calling and to do this somewhat on a professional level as well, and how do you what do you say to those critics, those people that say, well, this should be a free service, and you're watering down the spirituality mysticism in it?
Well, first of all, when I began the store, I struggled with that myself for a long time before I even set up the store. How far? Because, I mean, let's face it, you can take something that is pure and holy and then you monetize it, and then it can go right into the crapper. Because once you become dependent on it for your next meal, all sorts of bad things happen, and this is how you get these evangelists up on stage ripping people off for thousands of dollars, because it's just little by little, they cut a corner. Well, it doesn't matter if I do that. I can just do this. And, well, the client won't know that I didn't do this. I'll just tell them I did. And it can get really bad. So I worried about that happening. But 2 things. Number one, when I took the plunge and did it, I have had that reaction that people so much less than I thought I would. Honestly, I honestly thought I would hear that constantly from people. And I think I've heard it maybe once or twice since I started. And in those cases, it was not both cases with one individual, but in each case, it was an individual who had their own personal axe to grind. It really had nothing to do with spirituality or any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Now, in general, though, because I have had people ask me that same question, well, do you have people attack you for charging money for spiritual things? Do you feel that you're doing the wrong thing? So here is the answer I give. It's the same for my spirits. My spirits, by the way, this is also what you'll hear from people in the ATR. My spirits have spent decades slowly and painstakingly drilling the mysteries into my thick skull. Now, they expect me to go out and use this for my community. They don't want me to just sit here at home and be proud of myself for all of my knowledge and then die and have no impact on the world. This is even in the book of Abramelin. If you don't use it to help the community, it will leave you. So I want to use it to help my community. But if I give away for free what they worked so hard to give me, they will kick my ever-loving ass. Because people put value on things for what they pay for them. And okay. I spent years of my life, I have a directory in my email called Magick Occult, and it is absolutely stuffed to overflowing with years of my trying valiantly to help people for free. And it is also stuffed with years worth of those same people not taking my advice, not listening to me, and valuing my advice for exactly what I charge people with.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay.
Now,
in other words, people are it's that whole "you get what you pay for" type of thing, and they're if they dip into their pocket to pay for a service, they're going to follow through with those instructions. But you're saying because they're invested, so I better do this right to get the result.
Correct, and not only that, it invests them, and it's kind of a sacrifice too. You work hard for your money. I mean, every dollar you have in your hand represents an hour, or not an hour, but some fraction of an hour of your labor at your boss's job, where you're essentially a slave to another human being. That's important. So if you are willing to let go of some of that to get what you're wanting, to get something that you need in return, that is a sacrifice in its own way, and it shows the spirit that you're actually serious. The one who just sits there and goes, no, I want you to help me, and I want you to apply all of your years of experience and knowledge and blood, sweat, and tears and hand it to me for free. There's no respect there. The spirits are not going to respect me. The spirits are not going to respect him, and he's not going to respect me or himself. And it's honestly, it was such a waste of time. In fact, I didn't start charging money because I set up Doc Solomon. This is actually an interesting point. I started charging money way back. When I was giving people advice and trying to help them for free. I eventually put a $50 price tag on it, not because I thought it would help me make any money, but because I wanted to stem the tide of people demanding my help. It was literally a way of bottlenecking. I didn't want their $50. I hated taking the money from them when they would pay. But I knew that if I didn't do that, again, all of that respect stuff would come into play. But then also, I would end up with another avalanche of people wanting free help. So, I put a $50 price tag on my consult, and I put a $10 price tag on Limpia interpretations, because my God, you don't know how many of those I was getting. And once I did that, it stopped. A lot of it stopped, and then I would only get serious people who really were interested in what I had to say. And so, yeah, it does make a huge difference. And before I let you guys go on to the next question, I do want to point out too that there's also another side of that coin. Everything that I was worried about before I started charging money, or before I went into this as a business and made it my livelihood. I think the reason why I get so much less of the attacks on, well, you're charging money, is because of the way I go about it. I charge the bare minimum I can make myself charge, and then I'll usually knock a little off from there. I've been told by so many of my friends and other entrepreneurs, you charge too little, you're scamming yourself, you're only, dicking yourself out of all of these profits, You're selling maiden spun thread for $10 a yard. Do you know anywhere else in the world where you can buy maiden spun thread? You could be charging $100 a yard. And I always just shut those people down, because that's where you're going to start getting people saying, hey, you're just doing this for money, because you're trying to maximize your profits. You're trying to see what you can get, and every little dollar that you don't get. I when my friends say they have problems, I'll say, let me light a candle to you on our Raphael altar, or let me light a candle to you on our Michael altar, and I'll do it. That's $20 that I'm not getting paid for that ritual, and I don't care, because that's not what I'm there for. Mm-hmm. And everyone out there who does pay me $20 to light candles for them, they're helping this person who couldn't pay me the $20, or who I just offered to do it for free. You see what I'm saying? So it all comes together, and everything balances out, and everybody gets help. I can eat, and my daughter can eat, and no one seems angry at me for that. And I'm not trying to rip you guys off and try to maximize every little cent I can get for the services and the product I offer.
You never stray into the televangelist way, because you do it in a fair and respectful manner for your time, and people know, and it's good quality too. So
I hope so. Yeah. we strive for it, that's for sure.
Well, I'll definitely be hitting you. If you're getting into garments too, I don't sew, so I make most of my own stuff, but I don't sew. So you'll be getting an order from me here in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, we're getting that set up now. So that'll be soon.
Yeah. Whatever the case may be, I think that that's incredible that there's actually a shop or a place where you can actually get stuff that you need for working with grimoire magic, because there are many different places where you can get stuff, like you said, for hoodoo, or root work, or whatever, lukumi, or Wicca, metaphysical supplies, crystal balls, but there's really not a whole lot to choose from when you need something that's specifically from a grimoire. And a lot of the stuff out there that is for grimoires is not up to par. It's like a styrofoam circle or something. I mean, it's like really not, like, people need things that are serious. So I think that's incredible. So
we pride ourselves on absolutely everything we make, absolutely to the specs that the grimoires require. So if a plant has to be gathered on a specific day and hour, that's what we do. If rituals and prayers have to be done over it at a specific time, we do those. So everything is done properly and consecrated properly. And that's really where I think we stand out from the other stuff. So like I said, the others are just giving you objects, but we're actually creating living magical tools that we can then bequeath, I guess you could say, to other practitioners and actually get good use out of.
Yeah, the things you offer are actually specifically what the grimoires say. I remember here not long ago you were looking for, I think, some hazelwood that was able to be struck directly at the Virgin, and struck at the day and hour of Mercury during the moon waxing in Virgo, or whatever. Like, the things that you provide are the real deal. It's for someone that wants to work with a grimoire by the book, or at least fairly close, that's the place to go. So Doc Solomon, and I will put a link to that in the description. Like I said, wherever we post this podcast, I will put a link to Doc Solomon. Once again, for those that are on Facebook that would like to connect, you have Solomonic Secrets of the Grimoires. Again, I'll put a link in the description box. And as I said in the beginning, you have some really excellent, really awesome books out there. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of information out there for this stuff. You have not a lot of really good quality modern authorship on this theme. So, for example, you have Secrets of the Magical Grimoires. And in your secrets of the magical grimoires, like, you really go into depth into sort of the technology behind it and things like that. And essentially Enochian grimoire, like I said, that is the best book, hands down, that I've read on the subject. And then you have angelical language. You have several volumes that go into the syntax, the grammar of the Enochian language. So yeah, so everyone be sure. Where should they buy your book? Should they go to Amazon or to your website?
Actually, yeah, I sell all of my books right through the Doc Solomon's website, so you can get them there, and I sell them autographed. So I sell them for retail. It's a little more expensive than you'd buy at Amazon, but it's the same price you'd pay if you got it out of a store or directly from the publisher. Plus, I autograph them for you.
Yeah, so everybody, support your occult authors out there. Go to Aaron's website and buy directly from the source himself.
Absolutely. You get the books there. I have the classes there. Basically, everything centers around Doc Solomon's website, so you can find everything there.
Do you have a favorite book of yours? Which one that you was maybe enjoyed working on more than another, or one that was more difficult than the other, or anything like that?
Well, I would have to call the most difficult the Angelical Language, volumes 1 and 2. That was actually a 10-year project.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I was back in the old days. There was a email list. If you guys remember email lists before they had groups, there's an email list called Enochian L. And there were some really big movers and shakers. Benjamin Rowe, the late Benjamin Rowe, bless his soul, he was on there, and he was a massive scholar where it comes to the deep Enochian system. Clay Holden was there. I mean, really big names you would recognize today, and they were all there. And I tell you what, we hashed out these journals, I mean, in every detail. I mean, we would quote passages and then debate and argue over how the placement of a comma in the phrase changed what it might mean. I mean, we deciphered and broke down everything. And I took what we were doing there and, of course, my own explorations into the language and that all went into those 2 books. And, yeah, that took 10 years to write. So as far as difficulty goes, that one was the biggest and most involved and difficult project.
So a lot of time and effort and a lot of research. Like, you've been doing this stuff for a long time, so there's a lot going into this.
Few years now, I tell you what. I've been doing this since I was about 15. But if you count when I got Don Craig's book as the actual official start of it, I guess I was probably about I guess I was 18 by that. And so, yeah, I've been doing it like that ever since, nonstop.
Well, I guess we're getting towards, it's an hour and a half, about getting towards the end of our podcast. Does anyone have any more questions or anything for Aaron?
Just one more thing, if you don't mind, real quick. I know at least right now your primary focus, as we've been talking about most of this podcast, is the Solomonic style and classical grimoire magic. But also, I know that you also are prominent in the Wiccan community in the world of neo-paganism. Has that changed any of your relationships in that style of magic at all? I know sometimes we may have to have you on for a part 2 to get into something like this, but sometimes people have a bad aftertaste when we do the whole Christian thing. And it's hard for them to get past that. And have you noticed that with particularly the people that consider themselves to be pagan or Wiccan, neo-Wiccan? Me as a pagan, it doesn't matter to me. I'm a strict polytheist, and we can get into that another time. But Has that changed any of your magical relationships and among peers or anything like that? The fact that you're so focused on what seems to be at least a Christian, Judeo-Christian form of magic?
Surprisingly, no. Back when I started this, I could definitely see that happening. Like I told you, I was told several times by by friends and colleagues, especially in the neo-pagan community, oh, that's Christian, that's Old Testament nonsense, patriarchal, spirit beating, spirit enslaving nonsense. Stay away from that stuff. And when I published Secrets, I expected to get a massive blowback from that. I expected to get hate mail. I mean, literally. And I didn't. And I've been very amazed. Like, as you said, we are still prominent in our local neo-pagan community. Florida Pagan Gathering is something we're heavily involved with. I'm one of their regular headliners there. And even I have been amazed at the reception that the material I teach gets there. I mean, the lectures are always packed. They, need the hang up against anything that might have a Christian origin or even a Christian connotation seems to have really kind of dried up in the neo-pagan community. It doesn't seem to be the big offensive thing it used to be. In fact, just the opposite. We just had a situation, this is a couple of years ago now, in FPG, where there was a lot of drama. A lot of people who had been associated with FPG broke away and went their own way, and there was some hurt feelings and stuff. And trying to think of the point I was
Florida Pagan Gathering, is that what FPG stands for?
FPG, yeah, sorry, yeah, that's okay. the Florida Pagan Gathering. And so they had, they had kind of the shakeup, and now I'm trying to remember what point I was about to make about the big shakeup at FPG.
The Christian aftertaste dried up.
The Christian aftertaste, that's what it was. The point I was going to make was that during that little blow up, there was more than one pagan who stood up and said, "Oh, these people who are against us are acting like a bunch of Christians. You're acting like fundies. You can't act like that if you're going to be here in a bunch of pagans." And I was shocked at the community backlash against anyone who said anything like that. Like, they stood up and said, "Hey, we've got our problems here, but there's no need for you to sit here and bash good Christian people who are practicing their faith like we are. Why is someone bad just because they're Christian?" And I saw them shut those people down, and my mouth is hanging open because, boy, back in the 90s, another good example, Lon Milo Duquette.
Yes, I do.
he does these music shows.
Oh, the things he used to do back with Poke Runyon and stuff too. I know they used to go on the road and do their little thing.
Yeah, and he does folk songs and stuff, especially pagan folk songs. And a couple of them are making fun of Christians. Back in the 90s, he got famous doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the last time I heard of him singing one of those anti-Christian songs on stage, they tore him to pieces.
Oh, wow.
They said, how dare you? You don't want Christians bashing us, but then you're going to get on stage and bash them. So, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that Lon is a bad person or anything, but I'm just showing how the times have changed and the attitude. When I started, you were bad if you had anything to do with the Qabalah or anything biblical. And now, like I said, I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem with the local pagan community, and they are very interested in learning what I have to teach at my workshops. So I've been pleasantly surprised in that area.
That's cool. Yeah, I think it speaks to how your product is good, and people can tell you're genuine. So it's just, mad respect for that. And we, as a community, as a fellow pagan, I thank you for that and putting out good information. Go ahead, Taliesin. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just going to say, I think it was kind of on a personal note with myself, but we could probably do that another time. But I just want to say, on a personal note, kind of bringing it to home for me, I began, my occult path. Well, I grew up in Texas, and it's a lot of, I guess, narrow-mindedness here. So it's kind of natural to have, I guess, a rebellious backlash, especially when you're younger. So, like, when I was younger, I'm not going to lie, I was angry at Christianity, but I consider myself a pagan, but really I consider myself a Christo-pagan because my attitude is that I'm a polytheist. I look at the Christian God as just another deity. I don't really see the problem with working with, like, let's say Horus or Zeus or whatever else, Thor, and then working with Yahweh. It's just, right. I see it as another deity, and I'm a Martinist, and Martinism's really, I mean, it is Christian mysticism and stuff. So, but I'm also a Thelemite and and all this other stuff and pagan. I don't think these things are mutually exclusive. Like, at least in my own practice, you can do all of the above. And kind of like what you were talking about earlier, like grimoire magic was syncretic. Things aren't just like islands off to themselves. I know that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, fortunately, I never really had to hang up with Christianity because in my path, I kind of came through Christianity rather than rebelled against it. I rebelled against the church. I rebelled against mainstream organized religion. But I guess I was just fortunate that rather than deciding that all of Christianity was bullshit, I just decided that the people who were calling themselves Christians were bullshit. So I turned inward.
There it is.
And I developed my own relationship with Christ and worked that way for a long time before I found paganism and kind of branched out and went from there. I always felt the same way. And of course, remember I told you when I went to Denver and fell in with those pagans, they could tell I was into this whole biblical thing, and that was why I was even calling myself at the time a Christian pagan, and then so they're like, oh, well, you need this book. They said, this is Catholic magic. They actually called Don Craig's book Catholic Magic. This is Catholic magic. Wow. You'll like this. And I opened it up, and the first thing I saw was Ata Gibor Leolam. No, actually, it wasn't even that. It was beyond that. I saw the Qabalah cross. So I was saying, I saw for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. And I'm like, oh my God, that's the Lord's Prayer. I use that for magic all the time. And I knew I had found my book, and that's where I went into the Qabalah and the more biblical side of magic. So I never really had that rebellion against Christian symbolism, I should say, It's just as pagan as anything else as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the Christians weren't the first to use the cross. Absolutely Christ is, related to older pagan solar deities. I mean, for all the Christians who swear that their system is different than anyone that's existed before, they're all full of crap because it's the same thing over and over again. They just put different names on it, but they're doing the same thing the pagans were. So there's no conflict there.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, like, people will be like, well, Christ is just, a lot like Osiris is, on the pyramid text, it hints at him rising. But like, to me, that has never diminished Christianity for me. To me, that validates it because it shows that it's a legitimate myth. It's something that's been repeated again and again. I don't think that takes away from Jesus. To me, it kind of validates it because it's like, yeah, this is a legitimate mythos, basically. And like, all these great occultists of the last 2,000 years, for the most part, have been Christian. I mean, we have Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. We have, John Dee and Edward, like, we have so many, Tritemius.
Trithemius was actually an abbot.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. Of course, it was mixed in with like Neoplatonism and all of these other things, but yeah, I don't really see an issue there. And again, I think that things move in cycles. People go through or society rather goes through one stage and another. And I think that people are starting to come back around to, not be so opposed to Christianity or so opposed to traditional spirit model magic. So yeah.
Absolutely. So it is changing. It is changing very rapidly.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and I would like to have you on again sometime. If scheduling permits, and I know that you're really busy and all of that. But thank you very much thank you very much for being on the show, and I hope that all those listeners out there, be sure and look in the description box look at the links. If you want more information, like I said, go to the Facebook group, check out Doc Solomon, and check out his website and all of that. So everyone have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us. And we will see you guys next time.